The world of Valora was a place of beauty and wonder. Its skies glowed with two suns that painted the land in soft gold during the day, and in deep violet at dusk. The rivers of Valora shimmered with minerals that caught the light like silver threads winding across the land. Tall crystal towers rose from the capital city of Siralith, shining so brightly that visitors often compared the sight to a field of stars resting on the ground. It was a kingdom both admired and feared across the galaxy. The Valorans were known for their grace, their wisdom, and their strict traditions. Their culture was ancient, older than many of the younger races that had begun to travel the stars. Among their traditions, none was more sacred than the practice of bonding. To the Valorans, bonding was not a simple marriage. It was a spiritual link between two souls, said to endure beyond time and even death. A bonded pair could feel one another's emotions and sometimes even sense danger before it struck. Because of this power, bonding was treated with great care, and the rules around it were strict. At the heart of Siralith stood the royal palace, a place carved from pale crystal that seemed to glow from within. Within those halls lived Princess Mira, heir to the throne of Valora. Mira was known across the stars, but not because of her deeds or speeches. She was known because of her mask. From the day of her birth, her face had been hidden behind a silver mask that covered her features completely. No one outside her family had ever seen her uncovered. Stories surrounded this mask, and every visitor to Valora carried those stories home. Some whispered that Mira's face was too beautiful to be seen, for it might drive weaker beings to madness. Others believed that she bore a terrible mark, a sign of a curse placed on her line. A few claimed that the mask was a symbol of protection, a way to guard her soul from those who might seek to harm her through sight. Whatever the truth, the law of Valora was clear. No one could bond with Princess Mira until her face was revealed to them. Yet for generations, no one had asked her to remove the mask. Nobles, warriors, and envoys from far planets all admired her from a distance, but none dared to speak the question that burned within their hearts. The fear of angering the royal family was too great. To demand the mask be lifted was seen as an insult to the Valoran way. So Mira lived a life of silence and distance. She walked the palace halls in flowing silver robes, her mask glinting under the twin suns. She spoke with wisdom, her voice calm and clear, but her face remained hidden. When she sat in the great council chamber, visitors bowed deeply and avoided her gaze, afraid to offend her. Though she was present, she was untouchable, more a symbol than a woman. In the capital, the people often wondered about their princess. Merchants whispered about her in the market. Children asked their elders why she wore the mask. Poets wrote songs of her hidden beauty, comparing her to the moons that showed light but never revealed their full secrets. Yet for all the words spoken, no one truly knew her. Mira herself carried the burden quietly. Behind the mask, she had eyes that watched the world with longing. She had a heart that wished for laughter and companionship, but every visitor treated her as a distant star. They respected her, they praised her, but none came close enough to know her spirit. Even those who considered asking for bonding remained silent, for they feared the shame of rejection or worse, the wrath of the court. The Council of Valora, a circle of elder advisors, encouraged this distance. They believed the mystery of the mask gave strength to the throne. In their view, Mira's hidden face was a shield for the kingdom, a way to keep outsiders cautious and respectful. Whenever the subject arose, the elders would remind her that secrecy was her duty, and that no one could be trusted to see her face. Mira accepted these words outwardly, but in her heart she wondered if the bond that her people valued so deeply would ever be hers. For how could someone bond with her when none dared to ask the one question that must be asked? She dreamed of a soul brave enough to care for her not as a masked princess, but as Mira, a woman who longed for trust and truth. Beyond Valora, other species heard of this mystery. Across the stars, ambassadors told of the princess who lived behind a silver mask. Some saw it as a challenge, yet none found the courage to face it. The fear of breaking Valoran law kept them at a distance. For years, the throne received countless visitors, but Mira remained untouched, her bond unclaimed. The situation created an unspoken tension. The throne of Valora was strong, but without Mira's bond, the line of rulers faced uncertainty. The council hoped that in time a Valoran noble would gather the courage to ask. Yet as decades passed, hope slowly faded. The palace remained filled with light and ceremony. But for Mira, each feast and council session felt the same, Noble guests would arrive in robes of color, bow before her, and speak words of honor. Then they would leave, never daring to take a step closer. Her life became a cycle of greetings and farewells, none of them touching her true self. But fate has its own plans, and change often comes when least expected. Far away on a distant world, a small human ship was preparing for a diplomatic journey. The humans were younger in the galaxy, not as old or powerful as the Velorans, but they were known for their strange courage and their unwillingness to bend fully to fear. Among the crew was a soldier named Daniel, who had seen many battles and carried scars both on his body and within his heart. He did not seek glory, nor did he crave wealth. He simply wished for purpose. When the human delegation set its course for Valora, none among them knew that destiny was waiting within the Crystal Palace. None knew that one among them would one day stand before the masked princess and change the path of history. For now the palace stood as it always had, glowing under the twin suns. Mira moved through its halls with silent grace, watched by guards and council members who spoke of politics and tradition. The people of Valora went about their lives, whispering the same questions they had asked for years. And across the galaxy, the legend of the hidden princess grew, a story that stirred curiosity but never courage. Yet the day would soon come when someone different arrived. Someone who did not see fear in the mask but only mystery, someone who did not bow to silence but instead chose to speak. That day would begin the unraveling of traditions that had lasted for ages. And that day was closer than anyone imagined. The two suns of Valora were setting when the human ship descended toward the capital city of Seralith. The sky glowed with violet and gold, casting the towers of crystal in soft light. The people gathered in the streets to watch, for though Valora often received ambassadors, the arrival of humans always brought curiosity. Humans were still a younger race among the stars, and their ways were different from the older powers. Some admired them for their courage, others mistrusted them for their boldness. The ship settled in the landing field beyond the palace walls. Its metal surface shone dark against the glowing crystals of Valora. From the vessel, a small group of humans stepped out, dressed in formal suits that blended practicality with respect. At their head walked their commander, but among them was a man who did not stand out at first glance. His name was Daniel. Daniel was a soldier by past, though not by choice anymore. He carried himself with calm strength, not seeking attention, yet the wear of battles was clear in his eyes. He had seen war, had lost comrades, and had walked away with questions about the worth of endless fighting. When the call came for a diplomatic mission to Valora, Daniel had volunteered. Perhaps he thought the stars might hold something more than battlefields. As the humans entered the crystal gates of the palace, their footsteps echoed in the great halls. Guards in silver armor stood at attention, their spears gleaming with energy. Tall windows allowed the last light of the suns to spill across the floor, painting patterns of gold and violet on the polished stone. The air carried a faint hum, as if the palace itself breathed with life. They were led into the great chamber, where the Council of Valora waited. At the center of the hall sat Princess Mira upon a high seat carved from shining crystal. Her robes were silver and pale blue, and upon her face rested the mask that defined her presence. The mask glowed faintly, reflecting the light of the chamber. The humans bowed as custom required. Most lowered their eyes, careful not to gaze too long at the princess. They had been warned of Valoran traditions, and none wished to make offense. Daniel, however, lifted his head after bowing. His eyes met the silver mask, and he did not look away. It was not defiance. He carried no arrogance in his gaze. It was simply the look of a man who wished to see the person before him, not just the symbol. Mira noticed this. Behind her mask, her eyes studied him quietly. She had seen many bow and turn away, but this human was different. The council welcomed the delegation. They spoke of trade, of shared knowledge, and of peace between worlds. Words flowed back and forth, formal and careful, as diplomacy often required. Yet Daniel listened more than he spoke. His mind was not on trade goods or star routes. His attention drifted often to the princess, who sat silent while the counselors carried most of the discussion. When the formal words ended, a feast was prepared. The humans were seated at long tables in the hall, and the Valoran nobles joined them. Music of crystal strings filled the air, soft and graceful. Plates of fruit that glowed faintly with inner light were placed before the guests, along with golden cups of sweet water drawn from the shining rivers. At the high table, Mira sat among the elders, yet she remained quiet. Nobles raised toasts, spoke of alliances, and praised the unity of the stars. But Mira's presence was like a distant moon, visible yet untouched. No one spoke directly to her unless required. No one dared. Daniel observed this with growing thought. He noticed how the nobles bowed their heads when they addressed her, how they never asked her questions, how their words circled around her rather than reaching her. To him, it seemed a lonely place, even in the midst of celebration. As the evening continued, the music shifted into a slower rhythm, and some of the younger nobles began to dance. The floor shimmered with light as pairs moved in graceful circles, yet still no one approached Mira. She watched quietly from her seat, her hands folded, her silver mask reflecting the light of the crystals above. Daniel rose from his place and walked near the edge of the hall. He was not drawn by the food or the dancing, but by curiosity. His steps carried him closer to the high table, though not so close as to break custom. From there he could see Mira more clearly. The mask hid her features, yet her posture spoke of patience, of duty, and of a quiet longing hidden deep within. He thought of his past, of the comrades he had lost, of the silence that followed battles. In Mira he saw something familiar, not in appearance but in spirit. She was surrounded by people yet alone, just as he had once been surrounded by soldiers yet left with emptiness. The moment passed when one of the counselors rose to speak, drawing attention away. Daniel returned to his seat, but Mira had already noticed his steady gaze. She felt no disrespect in it, only a strange honesty. The night ended and the guests were shown to their chambers within the palace. Daniel was given a room that overlooked the shining city. As he stood by the window, he thought of the masked princess. He wondered what life was like for one who carried such mystery, who was bound by rules that kept even her face hidden. He did not know why, but the thought stirred something in him. The following days were filled with meetings and tours of the city. The humans walked through gardens of crystal flowers that shimmered like frozen light. They visited libraries where knowledge was stored within glowing spheres. They listened to the history of Valora, spoken by voices that carried pride in ancient traditions. Yet in every gathering, Daniel found his eyes drawn back to the princess. She was always present, silent yet commanding. Nobles bowed, strangers offered gifts, but no one reached beyond the mask. He noticed how her words were few, but when she spoke, the hall grew quiet to listen. Her voice was steady, like a calm river. One evening during a smaller council gathering, Mira herself addressed the visitors. Her voice carried across the chamber. She spoke of unity, of the value of bonds, and of the trust needed between worlds. She reminded them that true strength came not from armies, but from the ties between souls. Daniel listened closely. There was weight in her words, not just ceremony. He felt she spoke from her own longing, though none around him seemed to notice. He found himself wondering if anyone had ever spoken to her not as a princess, not as a figure of legend, but as a person. After the meeting, he walked slowly through the halls. The palace glowed with the light of moons now, the suns having set. In a quiet corridor, he passed by tall windows that opened to the night. There, to his surprise, he saw Mira standing alone. She looked out over the city, her silver mask reflecting the soft glow of the stars. He hesitated at first. The rules of Valora were strict. No one approached the princess without invitation. Yet something within him urged him forward. He stepped carefully, his boots soft on the crystal floor. "Your Highness," he said, his voice respectful yet steady. She turned, her mask catching the starlight. For a moment there was silence. Then she answered, her voice calm. "You are the human soldier." Daniel nodded. "Yes, Princess. Though I am a soldier no longer. Yet your spirit carries the weight of battles," she said. "I see it in the way you stand." He did not deny it. Instead, he spoke with quiet honesty. "And I see in you the weight of being seen yet not truly known." Her head tilted slightly as if his words had touched something she kept hidden. None had spoken to her like that before. Most offered praise or bowed in silence. But this human had spoken as if he understood. She did not dismiss him. Instead, she looked back out at the city. Few dare to speak so freely in these halls. "Perhaps they fear more than they should," Daniel replied. The silence that followed was not heavy. It was the silence of two souls standing in a rare moment of truth. Mira felt for the first time in many years that someone had looked beyond the mask. not with demand or fear, but with simple honesty. That night marked the beginning of something the council could not predict. A human had spoken to the princess as though she were not untouchable. A seed of change had been planted, and though small, it would grow into something that would shake the traditions of Valora. The days that followed Daniel's quiet meeting with Princess Mira passed with a sense of calm routine, yet beneath the surface change was building. The humans continued their diplomatic talks with the Valoran Council, walking through the shining gardens, speaking in the crystal halls, and sharing meals beneath the glowing moons. Each session was filled with words of peace and trade, yet for Daniel the memory of standing beside the princess in the moonlight lingered. For Mira as well, the moment had left its mark. She had grown used to being treated as a figure, distant and untouchable, yet the human had spoken to her not as a legend, not as a masked mystery, but as a person. His words had been simple, but they had reached her heart in a way no noble speech had ever done. She found herself watching for him in gatherings, noticing how he listened more than he spoke, how his gaze did not avoid her mask but met it with calm respect. The Valoran court was preparing for a great gathering, one of the largest in recent memory. Delegates from many worlds had arrived, drawn by the promise of trade and alliance with Valora. The council had planned this event for months, and the palace was alive with music, banners, and lights. For Mira, such gatherings were routine, yet this time she felt a quiet anticipation. The evening came. The great chamber of Saralith was filled with nobles, envoys, and visitors from across the stars. Tall pillars glowed with inner light, casting a soft brilliance over the hall. The air was filled with voices, the sound of many languages mingling under the crystal roof. At the center of the chamber stood the throne seat where Mira would preside, her mask shining silver in the glow of the lights. When she entered, the hall fell silent. All eyes turned to her. She moved with steady grace, her robes trailing like flowing water. The mask upon her face reflected the light, hiding her features yet making her presence all the more commanding. The nobles bowed deeply and the visitors lowered their heads. As always, no one dared to gaze too directly at her. The council elders began the gathering with speeches of welcome. They spoke of Valora's greatness, of the wisdom of tradition, and of the hope for peace among the stars. Delegates stepped forward to offer gifts of crystal, metal, and art from their worlds. Each one bowed and presented their treasure with care, speaking words of respect. Mira accepted them with calm silence, her hands folded gracefully as the counselors spoke in her name. Then came the moment that was always the same. A council elder rose and addressed the hall with a voice that carried authority. As is known across the stars, he declared, our princess carries the honor of the mask. No bond may be formed with her until the day her face is revealed. Such is our sacred law, and such has always been our way. At these words, the hall grew quiet. Every gathering ended with this reminder, a signal to all that the mystery of the princess remained untouched. In past years, this silence had never been broken. Nobles lowered their heads. Envoys kept their thoughts within. No one dared to speak for fear of shame or punishment, but this time the silence did not remain unbroken. Daniel, who stood among the human delegation, felt a stirring within him. He looked at the princess seated in her shining robes, her mask hiding her face. He saw not a symbol but a woman waiting behind walls of tradition. He thought of her words about bonds, about trust and unity. He remembered the loneliness in her posture as she sat surrounded by nobles yet untouched by companionship. Before he fully realized it, his steps carried him forward. He walked out from among the humans and stood where all could see. The sound of his boots against the crystal floor echoed through the chamber. Murmurs rose from the nobles as they turned in surprise. Daniel bowed with respect, but when he lifted his head, his voice carried clearly across the hall. Princess Mira, he said, I would choose to bond with you. The hall gasped as if struck by a sudden wind. Whispers filled the chamber. Delegates from other worlds exchanged shocked glances. Valoran nobles stiffened in their seats. No one had ever dared to speak such words openly. The elders stared in disbelief, their eyes wide with outrage. One counselor rose sharply. Human, you know not what you say. No bond can be spoken without the face being seen. Such is our law. To ignore this is to insult our very traditions. But Daniel did not waver. He kept his eyes on Mira, speaking not to the council but to her. I do not need to see your face to know your worth. A bond is more than appearances. It is trust, spirit, and truth. If trust is real, it does not depend on what the eyes see. The whispers grew louder, filling the hall like a storm. Some nobles shook their heads in anger. Others whispered of curses and disgrace. Visitors from other worlds leaned forward, fascinated by the boldness of the human. Mira herself sat silent. Behind the mask, her heart raced. She had heard many voices speak of her, but never like this. Never had someone looked past the mask and spoken to her soul. For years she had wondered if anyone would ever be brave enough to see her as more than a hidden face. And now, before the entire court, this human had done what none of her own people had dared. The council elder struck his staff against the floor, demanding silence. "You defy the law of Valora," he thundered. "You bring shame upon this hall. Withdraw your words or face exile." Daniel turned to the counselor, his expression steady. "I do not mean shame. I mean truth. If your law says no one can bond until the face is seen, then I say I choose to bond without that sight. For me, trust is not built on faces. I seek the soul, not the mask." The chamber shook with voices. Some shouted that he was mad. Others whispered that perhaps he spoke wisdom long forgotten. Delegates looked on, sensing history unfolding. Mira rose slowly from her seat. The hall fell into silence once more. All eyes turned to her as the silver mask caught the light. Her voice, calm yet firm, filled the chamber. "You speak boldly, human," she said. "Do you understand the weight of what you ask? To bond with me is not a step taken lightly. It ties lives, souls, and futures. It is not a vow that can be broken." Daniel bowed his head slightly, but his voice did not falter. "I understand, Princess. I have lived through war. I have seen lives end quickly. I have learned that what endures is not faces or titles, but the bond of trust. I would rather walk in trust without sight than see without truly knowing." Mira stood silent for a long moment. The hall waited breathless for her reply. Then she spoke words that none expected. "Then let it be tested. If your spirit holds true, it will endure." The counselors cried out in alarm. "Princess, you cannot!" "It breaks our law." But Mira lifted her hand, silencing them. "The law says no bond without sight, but no law says I cannot test his words. Let the human prove his spirit. If he fails, the tradition remains. If he succeeds, perhaps the tradition must change." The hall erupted in noise once more. Nobles argued, visitors whispered, and the counselors fumed. Yet the moment could not be undone. The human had spoken and the princess had answered. A choice had been made before the eyes of many, and the course of Valora had shifted. Daniel stood tall, his heart steady. He had not sought to bring scandal or challenge a people's way, but he would not take back his words. In his mind he had spoken only truth. Mira returned to her seat, her mask shining in the light. Behind it, her thoughts raced. For the first time, hope stirred within her heart. Perhaps the bond she had dreamed of was no longer impossible. Perhaps this human had brought with him the courage her world had long forgotten. And so the great court gathering ended not in calm ceremony, but in whispers of shock and wonder. Across the stars the tale would spread, that in the palace of Siralith, a human had dared to ask for the impossible, and the princess had not refused. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with doubt, resistance, and trials yet unseen. But for Mira and Daniel, the first step had been taken and nothing would ever be the same again. The days after the great court gathering were unlike any Mira had known in her life. The hallways of the Crystal Palace, once echoing only with ceremony and whispers, now held a quiet tension. The counselors muttered among themselves, arguing about the human's audacity. Many feared scandal, while others whispered of curiosity and the possibility of change. Yet amidst all this, Mira felt a stirring in her heart that she had not known for years. She moved through the palace with a new awareness. Every step in the halls, every turn past the glowing crystal pillars reminded her that the human, Daniel, was now part of her world, in a way no one else had ever been. She watched him carefully, noting how he walked, how he listened, and how he treated the palace and its people with quiet respect. Daniel, for his part, did not act as though he had conquered a great challenge. He walked with the calm of one who had seen much suffering in his life and understood the value of patience. He did not seek favor, nor did he flaunt his courage. Instead, he moved naturally through the palace, offering help where needed and showing respect for the traditions even as he challenged them in spirit. The first formal test of trust came during a private audience that Mira arranged in the Crystal Gardens. The gardens were a place of peace and reflection, filled with flowers that shimmered like glass and trees that glowed faintly under the twin suns. Water flowed in soft streams, carrying light as if the rivers themselves had captured the stars. Here, Mira had chosen to speak with Daniel away from the eyes of the court. "You have come far, human," Mira said, her voice carrying softly over the sound of flowing water, "and yet the court still whispers of your audacity. You ask to bond with me, but bonds are not built in words alone. They must be tested." Daniel bowed slightly, his gaze steady. "I understand, Princess. I do not expect ease or favor. I only seek to show that trust is possible, that it can exist without sight or title." Mira studied him for a long moment. Her eyes, hidden behind the silver mask, reflected both doubt and curiosity. "Very well," she said at last. "Your first trial is patience. You must learn to understand Valora as we live it, not as you see it from afar. Walk among my people, speak with them, learn their ways. Only then will we know if your spirit is aligned with our own." Daniel nodded. "I will do as you ask." The following days were filled with lessons and observations. Daniel walked among the citizens of Seralith not as a visitor, but as one who sought to understand. He helped merchants carry supplies, spoke kindly with children who had never seen a human up close, and listened to the concerns of artisans whose work decorated the crystal halls. Everywhere he went, he treated the people with respect, never seeking reward or recognition. Mira watched these interactions from a distance at first. She saw how the people responded to him. They did not fear him as many outsiders had. They were not impressed by his courage alone. Instead, they felt a quiet warmth from his honesty, a sincerity that shone brighter than any display of power or wealth. Mira realized that he was learning not only about her people, but also about the heart of Valora itself. During one afternoon in the palace gardens, Mira approached Daniel without announcement. He was tending to the delicate crystal flowers, helping a gardener reposition a broken branch. "You learn quickly," she said, her voice calm. Daniel looked up, surprised but smiling. "I learn from those who care for their world. The people of Valora are wise and careful. I can only follow their example." "You follow well," Mira said. "Yet a bond is not only about following. It is about understanding, feeling, and choosing to remain when the world challenges you. Can you endure such trials?" Daniel met her gaze, unwavering. "I have endured more than most. I have walked through wars, seen companions fall, and faced worlds that feared me. If my spirit can hold through those things, it can hold through the challenge of trust." For the first time, Mira felt a sense of peace she had not known. The words were simple, but the meaning reached deep into her heart. She saw a human whose courage was not in weapons or speeches, but in the quiet strength to remain honest and true. The council, however, did not view these interactions with calm. Whispers reached Mira of their frustration. Many elders could not comprehend how a human could earn trust without following the old rules. They argued among themselves that this trial was unprecedented, dangerous even. Some feared it would weaken tradition, while others feared it might reveal flaws in their own loyalty. Mira took little notice of the murmurs. She had watched centuries of caution guide her people, yet she knew that courage was necessary to grow. And in Daniel she saw a courage unlike any she had seen before. One day, a test of loyalty arose unexpectedly. A group of visiting envoys from a neighboring world had come with gifts and news of potential alliances. They arrived unannounced in the lower gardens, and their presence startled Daniel, who was walking through the courtyards. The envoys carried strange devices and spoke in harsh tones, making subtle demands that could have embarrassed Valora before the court. Daniel did not hesitate. He stepped forward calmly, addressing the envoys in a voice clear and steady. "This is the palace of Valora. Respect its people, its rules, and its traditions. You are guests here, and guests are not to bring discord." The envoys scoffed, but Daniel's confidence did not waver. Slowly, with patience and firmness, he guided them back to the main path, explaining the customs they needed to honor. The gardeners, children, and citizens watching felt a sense of relief, as if the tension that might have erupted into conflict had been soothed by Daniel's steady presence. Mira observed all of this from the high garden terrace. She realized that Daniel's courage was not in daring challenges, but in holding truth and fairness above fear. His actions reflected not only strength but wisdom. She felt her trust in him grow, not through speeches or promises, but through deeds that spoke louder than any law or legend. As days turned into weeks, Daniel continued to learn the ways of Valora. He practiced the rituals of respect, observed the history of the land, and engaged in conversations with the people. Each interaction was a small test of his spirit, and each time he proved patient, honest, and sincere. Mira found herself thinking of him often, wondering what he might see if she removed her mask. Yet even without revealing her face, she felt a bond forming, a connection beyond tradition. One quiet evening, Mira called Daniel to the palace library. The room was vast, filled with shelves that gleamed with glowing knowledge spheres. The air smelled faintly of crystal and light, and the silence was heavy with thought. "Daniel," Mira said, her voice low, "you have shown patience, courage, and understanding. Yet the test is not over. The greatest challenge is not in observing my people, but in observing me. Can you accept me as I am without expectation or reward? Can you choose trust when the future is uncertain?" Daniel looked at her steadily. "I have already chosen, Princess. Not for reward, not for honor, but because trust is the only path worth walking. I do not need to see you to know your spirit. I only need to know your truth." Mira felt a warmth in her chest. For centuries, she had hidden behind the mask, fearing that no one could ever see her true self and remain unafraid. Yet here was a human who not only saw beyond the mask but had embraced her entirely, without hesitation. The council continued to watch from afar, skeptical and anxious. They questioned every decision, debated every act, and feared the consequences. Yet Mira did not turn back. She knew that if Daniel's trust endured, it would prove more than any law, more than any ancient tradition. It would prove that courage and honesty could surpass fear. Over the next few days, small signs of the bond appeared. Daniel and Mira spent time speaking of the stars, of battles and victories, of homes left behind and dreams for the future. Though she remained masked, Mira felt her walls slowly begin to crumble. She laughed softly at his stories of human life, marveled at his perspectives, and felt a sense of companionship she had never known. And Daniel, for his part, learned more than he had anticipated. He saw the loneliness behind the silver mask, the weight of expectation, and the quiet strength required to live under such scrutiny. Each day strengthened his admiration, not only for the princess but for the spirit of Valora itself. The palace had grown quiet in the early hours of one morning. Mira and Daniel stood together on the balcony, looking out over the glowing city. The twin suns had not yet risen, leaving the streets bathed in soft starlight. Mira spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "You have endured much in these days, human, perhaps more than you know." Daniel turned to her, eyes calm. "I have endured because I wished to understand, Princess, and in understanding I have found what I sought, a soul willing to trust beyond fear." Mira nodded, feeling a quiet certainty in her heart. The path ahead was still uncertain, and challenges would come. But for the first time she believed that a bond was possible, and that trust could endure even where tradition had not dared to tread. The test of trust was far from over, yet already something new had taken root. Across the halls of the Crystal Palace, whispers began to shift. Some counselors still doubted, but others could not deny the quiet change in Mira's presence. The human had arrived, not to challenge the throne, but to bring understanding and courage. The sun rose over Valora in soft golden light, painting the city of Siralith in hues that made the crystal towers shine like living stars. The palace was unusually quiet that morning. Courtiers moved with careful purpose, preparing for an event that would be remembered for generations. Word had spread across the court that Princess Mira intended to reveal her face to Daniel, the human who had dared to challenge centuries of tradition. The council chambers were filled with nobles and envoys from distant worlds. Whispers of anticipation filled the room. Some spoke in doubt, wondering if the princess would truly reveal herself. Others murmured in awe, for none had ever broken the ancient rules of Valora. The tension was palpable. Every eye turned to the throne as Mira entered, her silver mask glinting in the early sunlight. Daniel stood among the human delegation, calm but attentive. He had spent weeks learning the ways of Valora, observing the people and proving the strength of his spirit. Each trial, each act of patience and honesty had led to this moment. He had not sought glory, yet he understood that the choices he had made would resonate far beyond the walls of the palace. Mira approached the throne and sat with a grace that seemed effortless. She looked out over the chamber, her presence commanding yet gentle. Every noble, every visitor held their breath as she raised her hand, signaling for silence. Even the council elders, who had argued endlessly over the human's audacity, fell still in recognition of the gravity of the moment. Today, Mira began, her voice steady and clear. We will witness a choice that many have feared, yet one that is not impossible. Trust has been tested, patience endured, and spirit shown. And now the bond may be formed. A ripple of murmurs moved through the hall. Delegates glanced at one another, uncertain of what would happen next. Daniel's heart remained calm. He had long understood that this moment was not about law or ceremony, but about truth, courage, and trust. Mira continued. For centuries, the law of Valora has required that one see the face of the princess to form a bond. This law exists to protect the heart and the spirit of our people. Yet today we see that trust may be earned even without sight. And so I choose to reveal my face not as a test of law but as a gift of understanding and faith. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Some nobles whispered nervously. Others simply stared, unable to comprehend that the tradition they had held sacred for generations was about to change before their eyes. Mira reached up with both hands and gently removed the silver mask. The light reflected from her crystal-like eyes, and her face, soft and radiant, was revealed for the first time. She was beautiful in a way that no story or song could capture, yet it was not the beauty of legend that commanded attention. It was the expression of strength, patience, and quiet courage that radiated from her features. Daniel's eyes met hers. He did not avert his gaze, nor did he falter. To him, her beauty was not a surprise nor a distraction. It was simply Mira, the woman he had come to respect and trust. His heart recognized her spirit long before he saw her face, and now, seeing her, he felt a sense of completeness. Mira spoke again, softly. Daniel, you have chosen to bond with me without seeing my face, trusting only in what you felt and what you knew of my heart. That courage, that honesty is what makes this bond true. Today, we take the first step in uniting our souls. Daniel stepped forward and bowed deeply, not as a gesture of submission, but as a sign of respect. Princess Mira, it is not your face that I sought, but your spirit. I see you now fully, and my choice remains unchanged. I wish to walk this path with you not for ceremony, not for glory, but for trust and truth. The chamber was silent for a long moment. The counselors shifted uneasily, realizing that the human had succeeded where generations of Valorans had hesitated. The court had witnessed something extraordinary, a bond formed not through law or ritual alone, but through courage, patience, and mutual respect. Mira extended her hand to Daniel. Then let our bond begin, not in fear or tradition, but in understanding and trust. Daniel took her hand gently, feeling a warmth that spoke of connection deeper than any words. The act was simple, yet it carried the weight of centuries. The people present, from nobles to visitors, sensed the significance of the moment. They saw not a challenge to tradition, but the proof that courage and honesty could elevate a bond beyond the constraints of law. The first step of the bond was completed in silence. No ceremony, no spoken oath, yet both felt the unspoken connection form. Mira looked into Daniel's eyes and saw a reflection of honesty and strength. Daniel felt the same in her gaze, a recognition that trust once earned could be more powerful than any rule. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. Daniel learned more of Valora, guided by Mira's wisdom and the lessons of the people. Mira, in turn, learned to rely on his insight, to feel the steady courage he carried into every interaction. Together they walked through the palace gardens, studied the history of the crystal towers, and listened to the stories of the citizens who had once feared or admired the princess from afar. The council remained cautious, yet even they began to see the changes. The bond between Mira and Daniel demonstrated that understanding and trust could exist without rigid adherence to ancient rules. Some counselors who had resisted the human's presence now spoke quietly of respect and possibility. Others still hesitated, fearing the precedent that had been set. Yet all could not deny that a new chapter in Valoran history had begun. Across the city, the people observed the bond with awe. Merchants, artisans, and children who had long whispered stories of the hidden princess now saw her in a new light. Mira, once distant and untouchable, had shown that courage and honesty could transform even the oldest traditions. The people felt inspired, realizing that change could come through understanding rather than fear. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon and the city glowed in the soft light of moons, Mira and Daniel stood together on the balcony of the palace. The crystal towers reflected the light like a field of stars, and the rivers sparkled with quiet brilliance. "You have changed my world, Daniel," Mira said softly, "not through power or wealth, but through your spirit. You have shown me that trust can endure where fear once ruled." Daniel smiled, his eyes steady and warm. "And you have shown me a world I could never have imagined, Princess. I came here seeking understanding, and I found a bond that is stronger than law or tradition. I see not only the world of Valora, but the heart of its people through you." Mira looked out over the city, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. The mask was gone, and yet she felt safer than ever before, not because the laws had changed, but because trust, patience, and courage had proven stronger than fear. The first public act of their bond was simple, yet symbolic. Mira and Daniel walked together through the palace halls hand in hand. Nobles bowed, citizens watched, and counselors could not help but acknowledge the truth they saw. A human had formed a bond with the princess, not through force, not through ceremony, but through courage, honesty, and heart. Stories of the event spread beyond Valora to neighboring worlds. Travelers spoke of the human who dared to trust the unknown, and the princess who trusted in return. Across the stars the tale became a legend, not of beauty or wealth, but of the strength of trust and the courage to act beyond fear. As the sun rose on a new day over Sarilith, Mira and Daniel stood together, ready to face the future. The bond they shared was no longer secret, no longer confined by the walls of the palace. It had begun in courage and honesty, and it would endure through all challenges to come. In the hearts of the people, a new lesson took root, that the strength of a soul lies not in appearances, but in the courage to trust, to act with honesty, and to see the true spirit in others. The chapter of the hidden princess had ended. The story of Mira and Daniel had begun. A story that would inspire generations, a story of courage, trust, and the enduring power of the human spirit.